The first time Colonel Amar Kate had been shown the room, he had expected something grandiose, perhaps a space buffeting. The conspiratorial whisper stat circulated among palace staff a booth. Mysterious red door at the end off West Wing service corridor. Their reality was both more mundane and more extraordinary. $1.4 billion. That waste Chinese government's initial offer for the new element discovered in Burkina Faso. Then the United States came in with $2.7 billion. Rusai extended a $3.5 billion proposal within a week. The figure had reached $12 billion, and the phones wouldn't stop. As Traoré watched the world powers greed, he smiled. None of them understood the true value of Burkinium. This element wasn't just a mineral. It was a force that would redistribute decades in energy, information, technology, and defense industries. And Troplas, preparing an entirely different plan for sharing this power. Ibrahim Traoré stared at the small glass vial on his desk, studying the iridescent blue crystals. They looked almost ordinary, similar to copper sulfate crystals from a high school chemistry experiment. Yet, they represented perhaps the most significant scientific discovery of this century, a discovery that had thrust his small landlocked West African nation into the center of global geopolitics. 3 months earlier, Dr. Fatuma Arago, a brilliant material scientist who had returned to Burkina Faso after completing her doctorate at MIT, had been conducting routine geological surveys in the remote northern region near the Mai border, which she found in an abandoned colonial-era copper mine had initially seemed like an anomaly. Unusual crystal formations that didn't match known mineral compositions. Further testing revealed something a previously unknown element with atomic number 119, a super heavy element beyond the current boundaries of the periodic table, more remarkable than its mere existence. Warite's properties, stable at room temperature with unprecedented electrical conductivity, energy storage, and quantum. The implications were as staggering. An element that cold revolutionized everything from battery technology to computing, from energy transmission to material science. An element that, unlike many theoretical super elements created existed naturally and could have extracted in commercially viable liquidities. Dr. Wetrogo had immediately a contact president, true bypassing normal bureaucratic channels due to the sensitivity of her discovery. Traoré, with his military background and strategic mindset, had grasped this significance immediately. He had ordered absolute secrecy, while commissioning discretification from trusted internationalities, who had no ties to major powers or corporations. Now thievification was complete, and the world was beginning to know that something extraordinary had been discovered in Burkina Faso. But the exact nature and capabilities of Burkinium remained top secret. The bidding war had begun before any technical specifications had even been released. Mr. President said, Colonel Amara Konatrop's head of security entering the office after a brief knock. The American delegation has arrived. They're waiting in the diplomatic reception room. True carefully returned the vial to a secure case. And the others. The Chinese will arrive in approximately 1 hour. The representatives are scheduled for the Russians have requested to reschedule for tomorrow morning. Alacrity to plan. Traoré nodded, everyone impatient. Their strategy had been deliberate. Schedule the major powers in sequence, never allowing them to coordinate or maintain information asymmetry. Not let their competitive instincts drive up buyer offers, while keeping them uncertain about what exactly their rivals were proposing. As he prepared Tommy, the American delegation reflected on how rapidly events had unfolded just 3 months from Discoverito global bidding war. 3 months in which his small team of trusted advisors and scientists had worked around that clock to understand what they had found, to secure the discovery site, and to develop a strategy that would maximize the benefits for Burkina Faso. Only 12 people had seen the element in its raw form, or knew its full capabilities. 12 people sworn to absolute secrecy, operating out of a secure laboratory hostile established beneath the presidential pist. 12 people who understood they were handling something that could transform not just Burkina Faso's future but the global balance of power. The Americans were waiting in the Orinex reception room, a relic of colonial architecture, repurposed for the modern Burkina Faso government. The delegation consists of 3 people: a senior State Department official, a prominent technology entrepreneur who served as a special advisor to the White House on critical minerals, and a renowned material scientist from a national laboratory. Mr. President, the State Department official began after formalities were exchanged. We appreciate your willingness to meet with us regarding this extraordinary discovery. Traoré nodded politely, but said nothing. Employing the strategics he had learned was often more effective than words in negotiations. The official continued, slightly unsettled by the lack of response, as Sweeve indicated. The United States is prepared to make a substantial offer for exclusive rights to Burkinium. Our latest proposal of $2.70 billion represents not just financial compensation, but a comprehensive IPACAG, including technologic ports, educational exchange, and defense cooperation. And this figure has been approved at the highest levels, Traoré asked, his voice neutral. Traoré load, a small smile. So $3.70 billion potentially, a significant sum, housed deliberately, though I understand that Chinese initial position began at $1.40. Dollar for billion, but has since been revised substantially upward. The Americans exchanged glances, taking Thibody exactly as anticipated. The State Department official cleared his throat. Mr. President, we would, of course, be willing to reconsider our position if necessary to ensure this strategic rise remains in friendly hands. Perhaps if we could see some documentation of the element, we could better assess its true value. All delegations will receive same technical briefing materials at the conclusion of these initial meetings. Traoré replied smoothly, Forno, I can confirm that Burkinium's properties include room temperature and quantum coherence capabilities beyond anything current likable with known elements. The scientist in the delegation couldn't contain her reaction, eyes widening eighth implications. If true, those properties alone would justify valuations far beyond what was currently being offered. We'll need to consult with Washington, the State Department official said quickly. Of course, Traoré responded, though. I should mention that we're operating on a compressed team. Several parties have expressed an interest in moving forward rapidly, Thameding concluded with diplomatic pleasantry. But the message had been sent. The bidding was just beginning, and time was limited. As the American delegation departed, Traoré checked his secure phone for updates. The message from Dr. Wedriago was concise extraction, optimization, successful. Yield estimates increased by more news. The initial discovery site was proving even more productive than first. If the current extraction rates could be maintained, BurkinaFaso's reserves of burkinium would be sufficient to maintain a strategic position for decades, not merely years. The subsequent meetings followed a similar pattern, each delegation offering increasingly generous financial packs, technological partnerships, defense agreements, and development aid, each carefully led to believe they were its preferred partner without any the clear impression that time was running short and competitors were circling. But Rare had no intention of managing this conventionally. Have all the delegates left the country? He asked Colin Cannon as they entered the secure elevator that descended to the underground laboratory where the real work was happening. The Americans and Europeans have departed. The Chinese delegation remains, but is scheduled to leave tomorrow morning. The Russians arrive at 10, and our other guests arrive discreetly over the next 48 hours as arranged. All security protocols in place. The elevator doors opened to reveal a state-of-art research facility that would have been imaginable in Burkinafaso just Musolaire, funded from emergency strategy crest and constructed with Remarkable. The lab had been built to provide its small team of Burkina Faso scientists with the resources they needed to understand and develop Burkinium's potential. Dr. Arago approached as they entered, her expression animated despoteth. Late hour. Mr. President, we've had Danathor breakthrough. The quantum coherence properties are even more restable than we initially measured. The potential applications. For computing Arabian, anything currently theorized. Traoré nodded, following her to a workstation where complex simulations dies the elements molecular, though not a scientist's feat. He had spent countless hours being briefed on the technical aspects of the discovery. Understanding that knowledge was leveraged in the unprecedented situation they found themselves in and the security implications, he asked. Dr. Wedriago's expressions grew more serious. Confirm if elements' properties would render current encryption methods obsolete. Whoever controls quantum computing at this scale essentially controls the global information infrastructure. This assessment aligned with what Trop had already intuited, that Burkinium's value went far beyond mere financial metrics, that it represented a fundamental shift in technological capability that would advantage whoever controlled it to an extent not seen since, perhaps, the development of nuclear technology, which makes our approach all the more critical. He said as the presentation for our actual partners prepared. Yes, Mr. President, full technical sufficiency, extraction methodologies and development roadmaps, everything they need to understand both the opportunity and our proposed framework. While the major powers had been engaged in their bidding war, a distraction Traoré had deliberately encouraged. High's actual strategy had been taking shape in parallel, a strategy not of selling tough highest bidder, but of creating something far more revolutionary. 2 days later, as Russian and American officials were still awaiting responses to their competing offers, a very different meeting was taking place in the secure conference facility beneath the presidential palace. Around the table sat representatives from 9 nations: Ghana, Senegal, Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Malaysia, Vietnam, Chile. None were global superpowers. All were developing nations with strong technical capabilities, stable governments, and a shared history of navigating between major power blocks without becoming subservient to any. Thank you for responding so quickly to our invitation, Traoré began, addressing the assembled delegates. What we're about to share with you is known to over than 20 people worldwide. Before we proceed, I must ask each of you to confirm your government's commitment to the confidentiality protocols you've already signed. After receiving affirmations from each delegate, Traoré nodded to Dr. Woodrow, who activated the room's advanced presentation system. Fourth, next hour, she provided a comprehensive technical briefing on Burkinium, its properties, potential applications, extraction methodologies, and strategic implications. That presentation included information that had been deliberately withheld from the major powers delegation. As the briefing concluded, the room was filled with a mixture of awe and strategic calculation. The South African Rupert Stave was the first to speak. This is beyond extraordinary. You've essentially discovered the holy grail of material science. The major powers must be offering astronomical sums. The orator confirmed. The current high bid is $12 billion, and it's likely to go higher. Then, with respect, Mr. President, asked the Chilean representative, why are we here? BurkinaFaso could transform its inter-economic future with such resources. Traoré smiled. Because we believe there is something more valuable than money, something that the major powers can or will not offer. He rose, moving to the head of the table. Throughout history, transformative technologies have emerged. Steam power, electricity, nuclear energy, the internet. Each time, these technologies have been controlled by a small number of nations who use that control to extend their global dominance. Each time, developing nations have been forced to either accept technological dependency or remain excluded from progress. Had gestured to the molecular models of Burkinium, still rotating on the This element represents a potential shift in human technological pilier, as significant as any after's previous revolutions. I've controlled by existing power structures. It will simply reinforce the current global hierarchy. What are you proposing? Asked the Rwanda delegate. A consortium, Traoré replied. Equal partnership among our nations to develop Burkinium technology collectively. Shared research, shared applications, shared benefits. No single nation, including Burkina Faso, would have the exclusive control or veto power. The room fell silent as the implications of this proposal sank in. What Traoré was suggesting was unprecedented. A technology-sharing agreement that would be plus the major powers entirely and create an independent bloc with capabilities potentially exceeding those of current global leaders. The political pressure would be immense, observed the Vietnamese representative. The major powers would not simply accept buy-in from such technology. True, Traoré acknowledged, which is why our approach must be both strategic and transparent. We're not proposing to weaponize this discovery or to use it against any nation. We're simply asserting our right to develop it outside traditional power structures. And Burkina is prepared to share control of something worth tens of, asked the Malaysian representing skeptically. When you could simply sell to the highest bidder, Traoré's expression grew more serious. What is the true value of technological landing, of determining our own development path, rather than prescribed by former colonial powers, sir? New economic agreements. Some things cannot be measured in dollars or yuan. He paused, looking around the table. Besides, our analysis suggests that the consortium approach will actually generate greater long value for our participants, including Burkina Faso. A monopoly sold to America or China would yield a one-time payment. A shared technology platform developed by our consortium could transform all our economies for generations. The discussion continued late into the night, addressing practical questions of financing, security, governance structures, and diplomatic strategy. By morning, the framework of an agreement had taken shape. The Ouagadougou Protocol for Collaborative Technological Development, named after Burkina Faso's capital city, As the delegates departed consult with their governments, Traoré knew that the most challenging phase was still ahead. The major powers would not react well to being circumvented, especially once they realized the full strategic implications of Burkinium. Economic pressure, political destabilization, attempts, and even military threats were all possibilities. Security team had already begun preparing for, yet there was also a sense of profound historical skiffins to what they were. For perhaps the first time since the colonial era, African and other developing nations had an opportunity to leapfrog existing technologic hierarchies, rather than simply following paths established by the global north. 1 week later, as the given to the major power slaps without any response to their increasingly generous offers, the first instance of the consortium's excess in Seabon to emerge in international declic circles. Unusual patterns, after all, among scientific delegations, from 9 prospective member nations, unexplained communications, security operas, discrete inquiries, about advance, research equipment from multiple countries simultaneously. In Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and Brussels, intelligence analysts began piecing together fragments of information, gradually forming a picture at alarmed policymakers. Not merely thought their individual bids for Burkinium had been rejected, but that something more disruptive was taking shape, a technological alliance outside their control. The first official response came from the United States in the form of a direct call from the President Tatru. Mr. President, the American letter began, his tone carefully balanced between collegiality and concern. We've been hearing some concerning reports about your plans for the newly discovered element. I wanted to speak with you directly about the importance of responsible management of such a strategic resource. We are committed to responsible management, Traoré replied calmly. That's precisely why we've developed an approach focused on collaborative development rather than exclusive control. There was a pause on the line. We understand you may be forming some kind of technology sharing arrangement with several nations. While we respect your sovereignty, we have serious concerns about potential profiteering risks. There are now upon applications in our development roadmap, Traoré countered, though Bothman knew that many dual-use technological have military implications. Nevertheless, the American president, the United States would be prepared to substantially increase our financial offer, perhaps as high as $20 billion, in exchange for we would also be willing to include BurkinaFaso in our closest tier of security arrangements. The implicit miss was clear. Accept our offer or potentially face classification as a security concern. I appreciate your generous offer, Traoré, but our approach is not primarily motivated by the Burkinium Consortium reprusts a new model of technological advance that we believe better serves the interests of historical emerging nations. Similar conversations played out with leaders from China, Russia, and the European Union. Over the following days, offers of financial incentives gradually gave way to thinly veiled warnings about international stability and responsible technical management. Economic advisors and major capitals began discussing potential sanctions against members. Military planners updated contingency options for the region, yet something unexpected was also occurring. As details of the consortium structure and philosophy became more widely known, public opinion in many countries began shifting in its favor. The narrative of smaller nations' technology outside the control of traditional powers resonated, particularly among younger generations increasingly concerned about technological monopolies and global inequality. Scientists and technologists published open letters supporting the consortium's approach. Civil society organizations highlighted potential for more equitable technego distribution. Even with imager powers, significant questioning their government showstale stance toward what was fundamentally a peaceful scientific. 3 months after the initial discovery of Burkinium, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly, prepared to public clients what had until then been developed in relative secrecy. Distinguished delegates, he began, today I stand before you to announce a development that we believe represents not just a scientific breakthrough, but a new model for how transformative negotiation can be managed for the benefit of humanity. He outlined the discovery of Burkinium, its extraordinary properties, and the formation of what was now officially called the Global Technology by Consortium. 9 founding nations committed to collaborative development, the elements applications, with a governance structure ensuring equal participation regardless of economic size or military power. Throughout human history, Traoré continued, technological advances have typically reinforced existing power structures. The nations that controlled Steam power, controllable trade. The nations that first harnessed electricity dominated industrial production. The nations that developed nuclear technology shaped the post-war order. He paused, looking across the assembly. We are proposing a different path. Not monopoly, but collaboration. Not concentration of technological power, but distribution. Not exclusion, but invitation to participate on equal terms. The speech was broadcast globally, reaching audiences far beyond the diplomat. As Traoré outlined the consortium's open application process for additional member nations and its commitment to developing civilian applications, ranging from energy storage, medical technology, public support continue to build. Most significantly, he announced that while the consortium will maintain certain proprietary proposal, it would make a core set of Burkinium applications available through open licensing to address global, beginning with advanced site energy storage systems that could make renewable energy viable, even in regions with limited infrastructure. Their action from major powers was mixed. Publicly, they expressed cautious support for scientific collaboration while emphasizing the need for privately, they continue applying diplomatic and economic pressure on consortium members attempting to fracture the alliance before it could fully consolidate. But the momentum had shifted. Additional nations began applying for consortium membership, willing to accept its strict governance arrangements in exchange for access to transformative technology. International financial institutions, initially hesitant to antagonize major powers, gradually began engaging with the consortium's development bank, attracted by the economic potential of its technological roadmap. 6 months after his UN address, Traoré stood at the opening ceremony of the Global Technology Equity Consortium's first major research facility. Not in BurkinaFaso, but in Rwanda, a deliberate choice to demonstrate the truly collaborative initiative. Similar facilities were under construction in each member nation, creating a distributed research network that would have difficult to pressure or control. Ash surveyed the assembled scientists, engineers, and government representatives from across the consortium's now 15 member nations. Traoré reflected on how far they had come from that first moment when Dr. Urigo had shown him the iridescent blue. From an abandoned mine, what had begun as a potential windfall for Rome's small African nation had evolved into something far more significant, a challenge to the very structure of global technological development, a demonstration that the nations traditionally excluded from the highest tiers of scientific advancement could chart their own course when given the opportunity. 1 year ago, he told the gathered audience, only 12 people had seen Burkinium today. Thousands of officers across our consortium area exploring its possibilities. Tomorrow, millions of people will benefit from technologies derived from this. He gestured to the advanced laboratory behind him. This facility represents more than science research. It represents a choice to develop transformatically, collaboratively rather than competitively, equitably rather than the path ahead. Mentioning major powers continued their efforts to either control or contain Burkinium technology. Security threats against consortium facilities and personnel required the technical challenges at developing applications for such a novel element were substantial. Yet, with each passing month, the consortium's initial applications in energy, storage, and computing were proving even more promising. The distributed development total was generating innovations that might never have emerged in a more centralized approach. The economic benefits for member nations were beginning to materialize in tangible ways. For Ibrahim Traoré, watching a group of young scientists, including men from BurkinaFaso, who would never have had such opportunities, previous Likalabona, on next-generation quantum computing architecture. The true value of their approach was clear. Beyond the technology itself, beyond the economic potential, they were creating a new model of global scientific laboratory, one where a discovery in a remote African mine could benefit humanity without reinforcing history. The iridescent blue crystals that only 12 people had initially seen were transforming not just technology, but the very structure of who controlled that technology and how its benefits were distributed. In doing so, they were about global order that had persisted since the colonial era, assumptions about which nations could lead technological revolutions and which were destined to follow. As Traoré had told the bidding superpowers when rejecting their increasingly dispersed, Burkinium wasn't just a mineral. It was a force redistributing the cardcent, the global game of technology, energy, and information. A force that properly directed could help rewrite rules that had disadvantaged developing nations for centuries, and that Hare reflected as he watched the diverse team off Scientists at work was truly beyond any price that could have been offered.